High in a remote, fog-covered mountain range, a small flowering herb grows in conditions almost nothing else can tolerate. Thin soil, constant moisture, low light. It's a distant, little-studied relative of a plant most people already know, valerian, the herb behind countless sleep teas and calming tinctures for centuries. But this relative, Valeriana astrepha, has barely been studied at all. Fewer than a handful of scientific collections exist, and that near-total silence around it raises a question worth asking. What happens to a plant's secrets when almost nobody has ever had the chance to look closely? This is the story of an obscure, poorly documented Valerian relative and a thought experiment about tremor, the nervous system, and what we still don't know about the chemistry hiding in plants we've barely bothered to study. The genus Valeriana is well known in both traditional and modern medicine. Valerian root, most commonly Valeriana officinalis, has been used for centuries across Europe and Asia as a mild sedative and sleep aid. And modern research has identified real compounds in the plant, including valerianic acid, that interact with GABA receptors in the brain, the same general neurotransmitter system targeted by many prescription anti-anxiety medications. This part of the story is well documented and uncontroversial. Valerian is a genuinely studied genus, and its calming effects have a real, if modest, pharmacological basis. What's far less documented is the wider genus itself. Valeriana contains hundreds of species spread across the Americas, Europe, and Asia, and the overwhelming majority of them have never been chemically analyzed at all. Botanists know they exist. Herbarium collections hold pressed specimens. But full chemical profiling, the kind of detailed laboratory work that identifies exactly which compounds a plant produces, has only ever been done on a small handful of the most common, most accessible species. Valeriana astrepha, native to a narrow, high-altitude cloud forest range, is one of the many species that has essentially fallen through the cracks of scientific attention, known mostly through a small number of botanical collection records, rather than any dedicated research program. This kind of gap is far more common than most people realize. Taxonomists estimate that a large share of the world's plant species have been formally described and named, but never studied beyond that basic classification. No chemical analysis, no pharmacological screening, sometimes not even a second specimen collected after the first. A species can sit in a herbarium cabinet for decades, fully known in the sense that it has a scientific name, while remaining almost entirely a mystery in terms of what it actually contains. Here's what's genuinely true, separate from anything imagined in this video. Plants in the broader valerian family, along with several related genera, are an active area of neuropharmacology research, specifically because their known compounds already interact with GABA and other neurotransmitter pathways involved in regulating movement, muscle tone, and the nervous system's resting state. This is real, published, peer-reviewed research, and it's precisely why valerian extract shows up in some clinical studies on anxiety and sleep disorders, alongside ongoing academic interest in whether related plant compounds might influence other GABA-linked conditions, including certain movement and tremor disorders, at the earliest laboratory research stage. This context matters because it means the core premise of tonight's story isn't invented from nothing. Researchers really do study valerian family alkaloids and related sesquiterpenoid compounds for their effects on the nervous system. What this video adds from here is speculative, built on top of a real, ongoing scientific interest, not a documented breakthrough involving this specific, poorly studied species. It's worth being specific about what this research actually looks like day to day, because it rarely matches the dramatic framing a documentary title suggests. Much of this work involves isolating individual compounds from plant extracts, testing them against specific receptor types in cell cultures, and cautiously noting which ones show measurable binding activity. A compound showing GABA receptor activity in a petri dish is a genuinely interesting data point for a researcher, and an enormous distance away from anything resembling a treatment for a real patient. This is explicitly a thought experiment. Nothing in this chapter describes an actual discovery, study, or compound that currently exists. Imagine, for the sake of the story, that a small botanical survey finally reached the narrow cloud forest range where Valeriana astrepha grows and collected enough plant material for a full chemical screening for the first time. Imagine researchers identified a distinctive sesquiterpenoid compound, structurally different from anything found in the more common, well-studied valerian species. and that in early laboratory cell studies, this compound showed unusually strong activity at GABA B receptor sites specifically linked to motor control circuits in the brain, the same general neural pathways disrupted in tremor and Parkinsonian movement disorders. And imagine that this laboratory finding generated genuine interest among movement disorder researchers. Not because it suggested a treatment, but because it pointed toward a mechanism worth years of further investigation into how GABA B signaling might one day be supported alongside, not instead of, existing dopamine based Parkinson's therapies. That is as far as the imagined story goes. In this thought experiment, exactly as in real early stage pharmacology, a single laboratory cell signaling result would be years away from animal studies, years further from human safety trials, and would not, at any point in that process, mean a real person could safely change their existing tremor or Parkinson's medication. It's worth explaining plainly why this disease deserves particular care and how a story like this gets told. Parkinson's disease involves the progressive loss of dopamine-producing neurons in the brain, and standard treatments like levodopa work by replacing or supporting that lost dopamine signaling. These medications are typically taken on a precise, carefully managed schedule, and abruptly stopping or significantly altering that schedule can cause serious complications, including a sudden worsening of motor symptoms, and, in rare but documented cases, a dangerous condition resembling neuroleptic malignant syndrome. This isn't a condition where medication is simply optional if a person feels well enough without it. That means even a genuine, fully proven future discovery involving GABA B pathways, the kind that real movement disorder researchers are actively investigating today through legitimate, ongoing neuropharmacology programs, would take years of clinical trials before any neurologist would ever suggest adjusting a patient's existing treatment because of it. A plant discovery, real or imagined, would be no exception to that process, and nothing in this video should be read as suggesting otherwise. This distinction is especially important because tremor itself has many different underlying causes. Parkinson's disease, essential tremor, medication side effects, and other neurological conditions can all produce visibly similar shaking, but each requires a different diagnostic approach and a different treatment plan. A compound that might theoretically show promise for one mechanism would not automatically apply to another, which is exactly why real neurological research is so slow, so specific, and so resistant to sweeping claims about a single plant fixing an entire category of movement disorders. If you have Parkinson's disease, essential tremor, or any related movement disorder, or you care for someone who does, please do not change your medication or treatment plan because of anything in this video. This entire episode is built around a real, poorly studied plant and a genuinely active field of neuropharmacology research wrapped around a speculative what-if story about a discovery that has not happened. Real advances in Parkinson's treatment are being pursued seriously through deep brain stimulation research, next-generation dopamine therapies, and genuinely promising early GABA pathway studies. And when something real does emerge, it will reach patients through a neurologist and years of clinical trials, not through a video about an obscure mountain herb. This isn't a disclaimer added for legal caution. It's the single most important sentence in this script. Movement disorder medication should only ever be adjusted under medical supervision, and no plant, rare or newly studied, changes that today. Set the speculation aside, and there's still something worth sitting with. The overwhelming majority of plant species on Earth, including entire genera closely related to plants we already rely on medicinally, have never been fully chemically studied. Valerian itself took centuries of gradual use and eventual laboratory analysis before scientists identified the specific compounds responsible for its calming effects. Its hundreds of lesser-known relatives, scattered across remote and shrinking habitats worldwide, remain almost entirely unexamined. Not because they're uninteresting, but simply because there has never been enough time, funding, or access to study them all. That gap between what we've studied and what actually exists in the plant kingdom is one of the quieter, less discussed dimensions of biodiversity loss. It isn't only about losing recognizable, charismatic species. It's about losing the chance to ever ask a question of a plant that might have had an answer worth years of careful, legitimate scientific investigation. Cloud forest ecosystems, the specific kind of habitat Valeriana astrepha depends on, are themselves among the most threatened environments on the planet, shrinking under pressure from agricultural expansion, logging, and shifting rainfall patterns tied to a changing climate. These are also some of the most chemically diverse ecosystems in the world, precisely because their unusual, isolated conditions push plants to evolve unusual, isolated chemistry found nowhere else. Losing that kind of habitat doesn't just remove trees and undergrowth from a map. It closes off entire chemical libraries before science has finished reading even the first page. Valeriana astrepha may never turn out to hold anything close to what this story imagines. But somewhere among the hundreds of unstudied relatives of plants we already trust, there may be real chemistry worth understanding. Chemistry we'll only ever discover if the habitat and the plant are still there when someone finally has the chance to look. For the millions of people living with Parkinson's and tremor disorders today, the real progress isn't hiding in an unstudied cloud forest herb. It's happening in neurology clinics and research labs, one carefully managed treatment, one cautious clinical trial at a time.